Hi everyone, welcome to this session on equipping your people to embrace change. Today we're going to cover some topics that are critical to the success of your organization, because the ability to embrace change has simply never been more important than it is today. In fact, the future success of your business actually hinges upon the ability of your people to be able to not just cope with change, but to accept change, to embrace change and look for the opportunities. In fact, the ability to embrace change is actually the greatest gift you can give your people, not just for their own personal well-being, but also for the health of your organization as well. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Campbell McPherson. I'm a business advisor on leadership, on strategy, and of course, change. I run workshops for Henley Business School and for organizations worldwide, for leaders on leading change and for employees on embracing change. I'm also an author. My first book, The Change Catalyst, was published worldwide by Wiley and it won the 2018 Business Book of the Year. It was a leadership book about leading change. My latest book is called The Power to Change. It's been published worldwide by Kogan Page just in the last few weeks, and it is, of course, about embracing change. What I've been doing for the last 25 or so years is enabling organizations and CEOs to align their people to a clear strategy and lead the delivery of sustainable change. I've had several different careers over my life, as I will show you in a second. But if you want to know any of the detail, more information about any of the details that we go through today, please have a look at the website. There's lots of videos and lots of information. These are just a few of the people that I've been working with and working for over the last 30 years. I've had several different careers, including I was HR director of a 1,000-person financial services firm. I was strategy director of Zurich Global Life Emerging Markets. I was the founding marketing director of Virgin Wines, head of e-business for the AMP Group. I first learned about change in Anderson Consulting as a senior manager in their change division. And I was a senior advisor for one of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds. And throughout that time, I've also worked for other organizations, consulted to dozens and dozens of organizations worldwide on leading change and organization design, on acquisitions, on mergers, and of course, on how to help their people embrace change. The single thread throughout all of my experience has been change. So there are about four key things that I've learned when it comes to change. And these are on the screen at the moment. First thing is I've learned over these last 30 years is that all change is personal. Even the most complex of organizational changes is actually a myriad of small individual personal changes throughout the company. The second thing I've learned is that we all erect our own personal barriers to change. Now, each one of these barriers is unique. Mine is different to yours. Yours is different to your colleagues. And we all need help to be able to overcome those barriers so that we can accept change, we can embrace change and move on. The third fascinating thing that I've learned is that all change is emotional. In fact, as we will see, emotion trumps logic and is actually 4 times more powerful than logic when it comes to change. So if your leaders are only appealing to the logic of their people when it comes to change, they're only 1/5 of the way there. The employees, their people, will not be committed. And the fourth thing is, no one changes simply because they're told to. We only genuinely change if we want to. So therefore, the key role of a leader is actually to help their people to want to change. So these 4 truths that I've learned end up with 2 conclusions that I've come to. One is about leading change. And if you're not leading change, then you're not leading anything. You're just managing the status quo. Now, thanks to COVID, the status quo no longer actually exists. So leading change to me is the key leadership skill. And the other thing I've learned is that if your people aren't ready, willing, and able to embrace change, well, then nothing will happen. The ability to embrace change is actually a business critical skill that every organization needs. So today we're going to have a quick chat about 2020, the year of change. And I want to know from you what you've learned about change during this tumultuous year. Then we're going to talk about leading change briefly. We're then going to talk about embracing change, obviously. And then lastly, we're going to talk about giving your people the power to change. 2020, what a ridiculous year. No one could have predicted what was happening this year. What I'd like to ask you now is, what have you learned about change in 2020? What have you learned about the ability of your leaders to lead change? What have you learned about the ability of your people to embrace change? And actually, what have you learned about yourself, your own ability to embrace change, to cope with change, to look for the opportunities? It's been a really challenging year. So either you can write these down on a bit of paper and just simply ponder them, or if you like, enter some comments in the chats about what you've learned about your ability to embrace change, or your leaders in the organization to lead change. While you're doing that, I will talk about a few things that I've learned. So what have I learned in 2020? What I've seen is that we can embrace change that is forced upon us if we have a strong emotional reason for doing so, a higher purpose, if you like. When we all went into lockdown back in March, what did it last? About 3 months? It seemed to be a lifetime. We all did it fervently. We did it with passion. We did it with commitment, actually. And that's because we had a higher purpose, an emotional reason. We were saving the NHS. We were protecting our loved ones. We were protecting the vulnerable in our society. And of course, we received compensation for doing that, or at least a vast number of people did. So we learned that we can change as long as we have a genuine and heartfelt emotional reason for doing so. We learned that working from home actually works. Now, not for everything, and we miss out on a lot of interactions which we need as humans. However, we have worked that a lot of the time, it works a lot better than we thought it was going to. We've learned that mental health really matters. Now, we knew that before, but we really learned it now because anxiety levels have gone through the roof this year. Your people are worried about their loved ones. They're worried about whether their loved ones will catch the virus, whether they will catch the virus. They're worried about whether they'll keep their jobs. They're worried about their future employment prospects. They're worried about the kids. They're worried about the isolation that their elderly parents might be forced into yet again. There's a lot of anxiety out there. And one of the best things you can do to ease anxiety is to teach yourself, to help yourself to embrace change. We learned that every business is a people business. Now, you and I knew that all along, but I think the vast majority of leaders are starting to come around to that as well. We learned that every business was a digital business. What does digital mean for your organization? Help your leaders to define that, because every business now has got to embrace digital, but in a way that is relevant to them. We learned that every business is a SaaS business. Now, let me explain that to you. It's software as a service, if you didn't know. So every business is a business that should have and should be looking for recurring revenue streams, because those organizations with recurring revenue streams, they're not all digital companies. They're not all tech companies. Those with recurring revenue streams hit this lockdown, hit this recession strong. They hit this recession healthy, and they sailed through it. And we learned that sustainability is more than a buzzword. Financial sustainability is critical. So is social sustainability, doing the right things by your community, obviously environmental sustainability, but also strategic sustainability. Those organizations that knew exactly why they existed, who they existed to serve, and why, they are the ones that will sail through and do really well coming out of this recession. So many of my clients are now revisiting the fundamentals, the strategic fundamentals of their business. And I highly recommend that you help your leaders to do that as well. So let's get on and start talking about leading change. And a few of the slides that I'll go through now, a few of the points are obviously from the leading change workshops that we run at Henley and for clients direct. But there are 10 main ingredients of essential success, if you like, for leading change. But the first thing I want to do is to explain one thing, and that is why 88% of change initiatives actually fail. Isn't that incredible? And yet, if you think about it, you think, actually, no, I've seen that. The 88% of change initiatives fail to deliver what they set out to achieve. And this was a piece of research done by Bain & Co. back in 2016. And of course, the first thing that I thought of when I saw that was why. I won't go through all the reasons why change fails. What I will go through are the key reasons or the key essential ingredients to successful change, because this is all about helping your leaders, your people, you to lead successful change. And one of the key reasons, the key ingredients for successful change is a clarity of what we're trying to achieve and why. Now that seems obvious, doesn't it? But so many of us forget about it. Our people need clarity of what they're trying to achieve if they're going to change. Now that clarity is not just numbers. So many leaders just go straight for numbers, and that's the easy bit. It needs to be the numbers and the narrative. We need to know what good looks like, what the future looks like and feels like, not just what the numbers will look like at the end of this particular change initiative or new strategy. But we also need to know why, because if you remember, we don't change because we're told to, we change because we want to. So why do we need to change? And that needs to be emotional and logical. When you're looking at the clarity, when your leaders are looking at the clarity as well that they need to give to their people, not only do they need to know why, the purpose of the change, they need to have a look at what is the magic that we want to retain, that we do today, that we want to retain in the new world. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. What's the magic you want to retain? We need to have a look at some sacred cows. What are the things that we do around here that no one questions? And then we also need to look at the elephants. What are the questions that no one asks around here? Get your sacred cows on the table, get your elephants out on the table, and retain the magic. That's what we teach leaders on how to lead change, on how to be clear of what they're trying to achieve and why. The second essential ingredient to sustainable change is to ensure that the implications of the change, of the new strategy, of the merger, the acquisition, of the change project, the implications are fully understood. Because for every action, there are equal and opposite reactions. Every change has implications and consequences across the business. One of my clients that brought me in to ask my help to get everybody on board for the new change, for the new strategy that the CEO wanted to do, I sat with the CEO and said, well, have you gone through, have you taken all of your organization through, all your top people through, what are the consequences of this change? And he said, no. I said, well, that's the first thing we have to do. So we got all of the 60 senior managers in the business together in one room, and the CEO put up the strategy, and I stood up and then said, what could possibly go wrong? And we spent the next few hours going through what are the consequences of the change, what could go wrong with the change, what are the hurdles, what are the obstacles. And we got all of them out on the table, and then we switched it around so that people could actually start to work on, well, let's prioritize them, but more importantly, work on how to overcome them. So by the end of the day, we have the 60 senior managers having got all of the concerns they had about the change, all of the implications, all of the consequences out on the table, and a complete list of what they were going to do to start to actually overcome them. So by the end of the day, everybody was on board to deliver this new strategy. Implications are critical, but don't just use the senior team to come up with the implications. Engage your people, and then they really do own the delivery of the change. The third thing is to focus on outcomes. You know, processes are really important, but they're only an enabler to outcomes. A change leader never ever takes their focus on what it is we're trying to achieve, not just a deliverable, not a process, not getting communications out. It's actually about what's the business outcome we're trying to achieve. Never, ever lose focus on that. The third thing is how to overcome inertia. Now, there's initial inertia of just moving from planning to action. That's hard enough. And then there's complacency, which is a disease that infects the successful. What is your organization being complacent about? And then we really go back to the sacred cows and the elephants here. But the one I want to talk to you about for the next few minutes is midterm inertia. You've probably seen in every IT project that has ever been done, it ends up being like a locomotive racing down the track. It gets ahead of steam, and it's politically impossible to leap out in front of that locomotive and say, stop, stop. Why are we heading in this direction? And what the dickens are we doing in a train anyway? What we have to do as change leaders is to build pauses for reflection in any big change process, because they end up getting a momentum all of their own. And any challenges, any dissenting voices, if you like, any people saying, are you sure we still can achieve the outcomes? Are you sure the outcomes are still valid? Any people voicing those concerns are seen as dissenters. They're not. They're the most valuable voices you can possibly hear. And so what we need to do is to help our leaders to build in pauses for reflection, and then to even stop the change initiative if that's the right thing to do. No can often be, or stop can often be, the right answer. We have to have genuine communications and engagement, and I could probably underline genuine 4 different times. And that means listening. It's not presenting. It's not waiting not waiting for your turn to say your pre-rehearsed statement. It's actually listening to understand. So as change leaders, we need to teach our people. No, let me rephrase that. We need to teach our change leaders to actually listen, to engage with their people, to uncover their concerns, their thoughts, their fears even, and help to understand and get them on board to actually make this work. It's not about broadcast communications. It's not about the CEO or the change leader standing up and telling people what's going to happen. It's about engaging them to understand and to work out how. The other thing is we need to remember that emotion trumps logic every single time. In fact, emotion is 4 times more powerful than logic. There's a great survey done of 50,000 employees back in 2004 by the Corporate Leadership Council that found that out, is that emotional engagement is 4 times more powerful than logical engagement. So we have to find the emotional triggers in our people if we want them to change. We also have to create a change-ready and enabling culture, because culture is actually everything. Culture is the way we behave. It affects our performance. It affects the performance of the company. It affects our customer experience we deliver. It affects everything in the organization. And so I've got some questions for you that would be good to ask your other leaders throughout the organization as well. Is your team's culture ready for change? Are your people encouraged to question the status quo? Are they open to new ways of working? Because they need to be able to do both. Are they continually looking to improve the way that things are done? And do you encourage, or are they encouraged to learn from failure? Is their behavior aligned to deliver the strategy? And I'll pause for a second on this. Is yours? Have a think about that. And all of those factors and the other essential ingredients of sustainable change in the full workshop, all come down to leading change is critical. And actually, leading change is really tough. But successful leaders of change do these 12 things. They like people. They like themselves. They're empathetic. They enable their people to shine. They build successful leadership teams. Leadership today is not a solo pursuit. It's actually a team game. Really good leaders create more leaders rather than followers, as Ralph Nader said. They embrace stewardship. In other words, their aim is to leave their department, leave their business, leave their team in a better state than when they found it. They combine humility with confidence. They're open to change themselves. They share the credit, they take the blame. Most of all, they're authentic. And of course, they deliver results. That's the point of leadership, is to deliver results via a clear strategy and aligned people. I would summarize all that as saying successful leaders of change help their people to want to change. Which of course brings us to embracing change, how to help your people to embrace change and look for the opportunities. Well, there are 2 themes that I quite like, that I use in the change workshops. Firstly is a common one that everyone will know. It's okay not to be okay. All change is emotional, and that's really important. I'll show you the change curves in a second. And when people go through it, they feel, oh, I didn't know the emotions I was feeling are normal. And that is so powerful. But it's just the first step, because we also need people to realize that they are in the driver's seat. We need them to take personal responsibility for the change and actually to become their own change catalysts and their own drivers to change. They need to be accountable for their own change. So how we react to change. I've built this. It's called a change matrix, as you can see. And let's have a look at it. The y-axis is fairly obvious. It's the size of the change from small to big. The x-axis is where it all happens, and that's the degree of personal control that you have over the change. From none, it's all being done to me, to total, which is actually, I have instigated this change myself. Now we'll skip over the first two lower boxes for small change. They're obviously not just 4 squares, there's shades of gray on each of the axes, but let's just take firstly the burning platform change, and then the quadrant that nobody talks about, which is the quantum leap change. Now burning platform change is big change that's done to me. And what happens during this change is we go through what's known as the change curve. Now, this was first invented by Elisabeth Kubler-Ross back in the 70s, a Swiss psychiatrist, in her excellent book called On Death and Dying. And it was an observation that she made of the emotional roller coaster that people went through as they were dying from a terminal disease. And also the emotional roller coaster that their loved ones went through at the same time, because it was the same curve. Now, change practitioners worldwide have then changed this because it works just as well for business change. And this is my version of the change curve. When big change is done to us, let's say being made redundant, we start with shock. We're in a complete state of shock. We then go into denial. In other words, the leaders can't possibly be doing this. Once they wake up to themselves, they will change this. They won't make us redundant. They realize that we are critical to the business. When the leaders don't wake up to themselves, we get angry. That anger masks a lot of fear as we go down the change curve here. And that fear could be fear of the future, obviously, but fear of failure, fear of being blamed. It can be fear of the unknown. But there's a lot of fear there. And then we reach what I lovingly call the trough of depression. Sorry about that. The trough of depression, where we really feel low. And this is natural. In fact, it's healthy. And it's a form of grief here. And grief is healthy. It can then help us once we come out of the trough. Our head kicks in and we understand. Our heart kicks in and we start to accept the change. And then we can finally move on. That is really important for people to know that the emotions they're going through are normal. The other quadrant I talked about is when we instigate big change to ourselves. And this could be going for that promotion and getting it. We start with excitement, we get some apprehension, then we go, what have I actually done? Am I going to be any good at this? And then our head kicks in, our heart kicks in, and we move on. So when you promote people, this is why you need to set them up to succeed. Give them the support they need, because they are going to be going through an emotional roller coaster of their own. And the interesting thing is, as leaders, when we instigate change, we start with excitement. We're over on the quantum leap. Our people start with shock. They're in the burning platform. So we have to help them to overcome their barriers to change. We have to help them to admit their denial, to observe their emotions, not to be identified with their emotions, but observe them. Gosh, I got angry there. Isn't that interesting? No judgment, just observation. We need to help them detach from their negative thoughts, because they're just thoughts. They're not you, they're not them, they're not real. They're just negative thoughts. We have to help them confront their fears, actually to voice their fears, because once you voice them, once you put them out on the table, they diminish. We have to help them reframe their identity and status, and we need to help them not only voice their fears, but voice their concerns about this new change. And actually, coming up as an article in Om Yoga, that there's one of the chapters I wrote with my wife in The Power to Change is called The Power of Yoga to Help with Embracing Change. So have a look out for the Om Yoga article as well. What we need to do to give our people the power to change is to help them build resilience. And I've got a resilience checklist that people can help to build that. But they also need to help to choose their attitude, because that's a lot of what it takes to embrace change. Then they can take responsibility and to become their own personal change catalyst. I look forward to helping your people to accept change and thriving. Thank you so much for your attention today. I'd just like to leave you with this quote from Charles Darwin. It's not the strongest of species that survive, nor is it the most intelligent, but it's the one most responsive to change. If you'd like to know any more about this, or to get in touch to have a coffee or a virtual coffee over Zoom, or have a chat, feel free to get in touch and to send me an email. Thank you so much for your time today.